Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast, sponsored by Darla Cashin of RBC Wealth Management. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week we talk with Shelly Christensen, the co-founder of Jewish Disabilities Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, which is taking place during February. We talk about how the observance of this month started, working across faith communities, and how everything has changed in this year on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Shelly Christensen, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Shelly, you are, among other things, you are the founder of Jewish Disabilities Awareness and Inclusion Month, which is taking place right now in February. I guess for way of introduction for people, how did the founding of JDAME come about?
In 2008, a group of my colleagues from the Jewish Special Education Consortium, which was a group of people from Federation-funded education agencies and inclusion programs around the U.S., met in Minneapolis. That was our year to host the consortium, our annual consortium. And one of my colleagues and I came up with this idea of picking one month that all of us could use to hold conferences and raise awareness and, really bring the idea of disability inclusion into Jewish life. And at the time, we were still hearing things like, well, we don't have people with disabilities here. We can't afford to educate children with disabilities. It costs too much. And it was just a litany of different things. I don't think anybody was, thinking about this as, well, being hard-hearted about it. But we really felt that it was time to elevate this notion that 20% of the population, of the Jewish population, lived with a disability or mental health condition, and they weren't welcome in Jewish life in many, many cases. So my colleague, Lenore Lehman, and I brought this to the consortium, this idea, and they loved it. They said, oh, what a great idea. We could do this all in 1 month. So two things came out of that conversation. The first one was when to hold this month, which we decided to call Jewish Disability Awareness Month, or JDAM. And many of the people were educators, and many of the people were women who were, really devoted to getting not only their holidays planned for their families and cooking and baking, which, was really a concern for a lot of people, but also as educators, school year starts, teacher trainings, the end of school years, all of these components went into choosing the month. And the only month that we could agree upon was February. Because there were no major holidays preceding February, so it gave people time to plan. And there was really, following February were more major holidays.
Yep.
So we chose February. That is the only reason JDAME, as it's now called, is in February. The second thing that came out of this was an ask from my colleagues to coordinate this month from my desk at Jewish Family and Children's Service, where I directed the inclusion program at the time. So in 2009, we held our first Jewish Disability Awareness Month. It started here in Minneapolis, but there were other communities. I think there were 6 or 7 different Jewish communities who held events in February that year. And it was great. Everybody was like so excited. Wow, this is a great thing. Let's do it again. And my background is in journalism, in marketing. And I said, we need a logo. We could have something to tie this all together. And that's when in, I think, 2010, we introduced the JDAME logo. It's a Magen David, a Jewish star, woven in blue and gold to signify that all of us are woven into the fabric of Jewish life. But there are no exceptions to that. And anybody that wants to be part of the Jewish community must have access to the Jewish community.
That's really lovely.
Isn't that cool?
That's really cool.
That was designed by Janice Goldstein, who was our designer at JFCS at the time. And it's amazing to see it. Every time I get a Google alert or see people send me a lot of things to post, there it is, and I think, wow, this is so cool. So it's really grown. We have a book club for adults, and we have one for children. We've featured some amazing authors, and we have films. But so the cool thing that's happened with all of this now, it has really spread around the world. And my work I'm kind of the go-to inclusion person for a lot of Jewish organizations now, and as well as interfaith initiatives. I'm really involved in that as well. And it's just to see all of this change is just amazing. So initially, the idea for this month was to raise awareness, simply to raise awareness and bring it to the grassroots level, boots on the ground. What happened was different organizations, communal organizations, and national organizations, Jewish Federations of North America, the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism, and most of the major movements got involved in some way to start spreading the word. And I started creating a guide every year just to, tell people, okay, here's the thing, to quote our president, here's the deal. This is not a one-off kind of thing. You don't do JDEEM in February and then forget about it. This is really a call to action. It's a springboard. There are expectations now. Once you raise awareness and you start to talk about people being included, then you have to do something about it. And so a lot of synagogues and different organizations started inclusion or access committees, and those were the vehicles to drive the boots on the ground effort. And that's been really responsible for a lot of the growth. So it's been the Jewish community really coming together to advance Jewish disability, and now it's Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month.
So it sounds like when the organization was sort of first formed, it because there were, you're looking at sort of teacher schedules, it seemed it was really centered more around education and access and equity in education for children with disabilities. At what point did you start seeing it expand out away from education, not separate from its mission, but away from education in a way that sort of opened it up to, the greater parts of Jewish life?
That's a great question. First of all, when I joined the consortium, this Jewish Special Ed Consortium, I was one of two people who weren't in education in my own community. I was pretty much at the cutting edge of inclusion. And that's many thanks, first of all, to JFCS and the Minneapolis Jewish Federation for bringing this whole idea into community practice. And so my job, and the Phillips Family Foundation funded it. So my job was to really build relationships with all the different organizations in the Jewish community to help them think about what they could do to include people with disabilities, people who wanted in and who had been severely marginalized, people who wanted access to all the things that everybody else could do. And so that started building momentum. And as I began to network with the consortium members and with others in the Jewish world, as well as in the interfaith world, I started to think about this idea. Is so simple right now. But if you provide inclusive education, if you provide appropriate education to meet a child's needs, which goes back to Proverbs, teach each child according to their needs. Then what happens after that? What happens when they celebrate B'nai Mitzvah, for example? And what was happening is that a lot of people were falling off the radar. In addition, there were so many adults living with a disability diagnosis who just wanted in. They wanted to belong. In fact, one of the people that I met very early on in my career, was a woman. Can I say her name?
Sure.
Is that okay? She doesn't. I mean, she's in my book. Her story's in my book.
Yeah,
her name is
absolutely.
Sharon Pillay. Okay. Her name is Sharon Pillay. She'd lived in Minneapolis at the time for, I think, 14 years. And she had contacted me and wanted to talk about how to get involved in the Jewish community. And at the time, she was going to the JCC, which has a remarkable inclusion program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remarkable supports. Anita Lewis, amazing. And she wanted to join the synagogue. So I went over to her house, her apartment, and I think it was during Hanukkah. So I came bearing Chag Sameach gifts from JFCS. And Sharon and I sat down and we had a conversation. And the first thing she said is, nobody Jewish has ever been to visit me in my home. And I was like, oh my God. That was level one of, oh my God. The second thing she said was, I've called all the synagogues. I've been here for 14 years. I've called all the synagogues. I've tried to reach out. I've left messages. I've never gotten callbacks. And she said she called one place who said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have people like you here. Again, it wasn't to be mean or ill-intentioned. It was people just didn't know.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to respond to somebody who was different. So as we talked, I said, Sharon, tell me what's important to you about your Jewish life. What do you want in your Jewish life? And she said, all I've ever wanted was to belong. And that was it. For me, that was the essence of what this is all about, what we call inclusion is about. It's about belonging. And so as I started working, kind of working with that idea and really meeting lots of people who wanted to belong and wanted to be a part, that's, JDAME was really the way to get that message out there that people just want to be part of the community. Prior to that time, there were a lot of special programs. There were programs for people with disabilities. There were special education classes for kids. And I'm not saying that that was wrong or bad at all. And some of those programs still exist. It meets needs, but it's not the only way for people to be involved.
Right. I mean, there's certainly well-intentioned programs.
Absolutely.
But it's
absolutely.
But I would have to imagine it's really hard to feel as though you're being included in a community on a regular basis, and when it's sort of a disjointed one-off programs here and there.
Right. And there's groups that are meeting now in the Twin Cities that are doing amazing things, and they're primarily people with disabilities who've come of age together, who enjoy participating together. And Stacy Spencer at JFCS is doing an amazing job pulling people together and doing these imaginative, creative programs that people love. So that said, go for it. But the other thing is, many of the people also want to participate in other parts of Jewish life. So that was really where, we needed to make that tipping point happen across the Jewish world. And I think the thing that has really helped me articulate this and understand this are the 6 things that constitute a quality of life. And those 6 things are, I have to count on my fingers to make sure I get them all. Work, love, live, learn, play, and worship, or spirituality. And those are hallmarks of a good life. The disability movement has really been, just really not only influential, but has really made, has really pulled our government together in Congress to pass laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Home and Community-Based Services Act, which it's in play right now. It's important right now because it ensures that people with disabilities make their own decisions about their lives. And so that really has been the impetus behind growing Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, is that you're not doing these one-off programs and you're not doing something to be nice. You are together with people with disabilities and mental health conditions, supporting them to achieve the Jewish life that they want to live. So that's been it. And through my work, I've worked with all the movements, and I spent, I think the biggest growth probably. I worked with Chabad, the Rudiment Chabad Inclusion Initiative, for 4 years, and that was, as you know, there's 4,500 Chabad communities around the world.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago, they started something called Shabbat Together in February as part of JDAME. And I think last year, 800 Chabad communities around the world participated in a Shabbat weekend of programming and activities. They really focus on mental health, and it's just been phenomenal. The Yachad program at the Orthodox Union just contacted me a few weeks ago, and they are coming on board with JDAME this year.
Oh, that's excellent.
It's just stunning to see this.
So over the years, the acronym has expanded. It started with awareness, and then inclusion was added to it, and then acceptance was added into that as well. And I'm sort of curious, in your mind, how I should say, not necessarily how, but if you've seen the mission of this month and the programming and the growth of it throughout the year, how it has evolved as the name has evolved.
Mm-hmm. I love that question. In the beginning, very sheet. In the beginning, I was like, kind of a call out saying, yeah, there are people with disabilities living. There are Jews with disabilities. Seriously. And one of the first things we did in 2009, we featured a film called Praying with Lior. And it's an incredible film about a young man named Lior who lives in Philadelphia with his family. And Lior lives with Down syndrome. And he was coming up on his bar mitzvah. And this young man, he's an adult now, of course, but he had this real connection to spirituality, to religion, to God, and to being in community. And this film, if you haven't seen it, it still stands the test of time. And it chronicles his journey to becoming this, to the moment that he celebrates his bar mitzvah. In that film, people got to see real life, a real family, real people. It wasn't like this, everything is great, everything is wonderful. It was taking the journey through a life of someone who wanted to be and was drawn to Judaism, drawn to the community. And I think that really started to open up people's eyes more than anything else. And we still had a lot to do countering stigma. And the stigma is really prejudice and discrimination, if we take it right down to the base. And the stigma associated with disability, and even more so with mental health, is, based on stereotypes or myths, based on what people can't do, not what they can do or want to do. And really, we are, as human beings, we're created in the image of God. What does that mean? It means we all have strengths, we all have gifts, we all have things to share. And that's very prominent in our text as well. But to look at a person and be the gatekeeper and decide, well, they can come in, they can't come in, they can only participate in this little square and not in all the squares, was, I think that we really had to raise that to the point where people would start to see that, wait a minute, it's not us and them. People with disabilities and mental health conditions and those who love them are not the other. We're all in this together. So that really became a big impetus, and we're not done by any stretch. We're still raising awareness, and now we've brought people with lived experiences with mental health conditions into this too, although we haven't given it an initial and a title. But the thing is, inclusion was added next after acceptance, and part of that reason was because people didn't like JDAM. They didn't like saying JDAM. And I'm so serious. I was like getting, my friends and who were leading JDAM initiatives in their synagogues would go, JDAM, or how do you pronounce this? Like, it's JDAM. So I trotted it out to my colleagues at the Jewish Special Education Consortium. I go, you guys, I think it's time to change it. Let's add another letter.
Oh, boy.
And it was inclusion. So now we had Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, right?
Which is totally appropriate.
Well,
I mean,
right?
it makes. When you lay it out, it really makes all the sense in the world for it to be there. But
right.
But people not liking the name feels a little petty.
It was just.
It's so weird.
Well, one of the things that I've learned so much in my work is that you meet people where they're at. Any resistance has something behind it. In order to help people understand, you got to listen to the resistance.
Very true.
And that's key. That has been, I think that's the body of most of my work. But a few years after that, one of my colleagues called me up and they say, can we add another word? Like, why not? It was acceptance.
So again, makes all the sense in the world.
Right? So I made the executive decision not to add another A to JDAM. It was just live with it. So that's really how it's changed in terms of the name and so forth. So February in my life has always been a big month of travel. And last February, I was gone. I was home 5 days in the month of February, and I would come home for a day and then take off again, like on a week and a half trip.
Enough to repack and
wash my clothes. Yes. Yeah. So it really was. But I did a lot of keynotes, sermons, workshops, community conferences, parent groups, professional groups, things like that, where we would talk about some of the very things we're talking about now. And that is one of the reasons I love what I do so much, is connecting with people and just helping them to see things a little differently and then taking action.
And this has got to be the first February in over a decade where you're not traveling at all. You're home.
Exactly. So I'm doing some not conferences, but actually, there is a conference. I'm just recorded several videos for a conference also that sprung out of JDAM. It's called Community for All. And Community for All is based in Norfolk, Virginia. at the Faith Inclusion Network. I'm on their national board, and a couple of years ago they said, "Hey, we want to do something like JDAME." Like, okay, how can I help? So this year, every year they have or every other year, Faith Inclusion Network has an in-person conference, and this year, of course, it's not going to be. So they opened it up, and we to people recording their presentations. So we do have Jewish representation in this month. We have some people will know some of these people. Howard Blass from Camp Ramaz doing several sessions. Gabby Kaplan-Mayer, who's a colleague of mine and also co-host of a web series we do. And some other people from the Jewish community are doing sessions that are pre-recorded, and people can watch them whenever they want to. And again, across all faith communities. So that's another thing that came out of JDAME on a global level, on an interfaith level. So this year, I'm just speaking at, I'm doing sermons and, like 10-minute, 15-minute presentations in congregations and community inclusion groups and so forth. And so not as busy as I normally am in that regard, but still lots going on.
So among the other things you do, you had founded your company Inclusion Innovations, which has the tagline, turning good intentions into inclusive faith communities. And we've talked obviously all about the Jewish community, not just here, but nationwide. You mentioned this group out of Norfolk. What are, based on your experiences, other faith communities doing that is sort of built off of the ideals of Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month?
There's a number of different things going on and have been for some time. There's an organization called We Belong, which is based in Western Michigan, that has provided not only books and materials, but speakers who go around to different congregations and work with them to start their inclusion initiative. It's a lot of what I do also. And that's been really successful. There are other, the Catholic Church has made tremendous strides toward inclusion. They've had they had a convening in Rome, I think 2 years ago, to address the issue. And there are, within the diocese, there are plenty of things going on. I think my favorite is the Archdiocese of Newark, where one of my colleagues, Ann Masters, has just created a lot of, it's a big archdiocese, has created a lot of materials to use in the parishes. And she's got a parents group that has been really successful bringing people together. She also has done a lot of work to counter the charity model of inclusion, where, oh, those poor people, let's get them in, or they're lambs of God, or, the people, there's thinking, well, people have sinned, therefore they have a disability. That's nothing to do with it. It's a condition. People have disabilities. Right. Those are just a few. I mean, there's a lot of, we did a podcast 2 years ago out of Brigham Young University, that brought a lot of faith leaders together, and we talked about the different things that we're doing. So, this whole idea of raising things up, interfaith within faith communities, a lot of them have been looking at the Jewish communities and what we're doing to coalesce around this, this really important issue.
Oh, that's great. So, all right, it's great that our community is, taking a leadership role in this.
Absolutely. And, we're not done. There's so much to do.
So given that you're not able to do all the traveling that you normally would do, how have you been working to help congregate? I mean, especially, again, congregations aren't going to have the big, inclusion Shabbats that they might have normally this month. Right. how are you helping them evolve maybe and
Mhm.
innovate this year, given that we can't all be together in services together, for example?
You know, I started thinking about that about the time everything shut down.
Mm.
What are we going to do? So I have some speaking things done. Whenever I do a presentation or whatever it is, um, I know a lot of speakers will go, "Oh, what do I have in, what do I have on my drive? Let me see what I've done before." And to some degree, there's some basic tenets of inclusion and belonging, certainly that belong in any talk. But I like to tailor everything I do to the community because if we're not meeting people, if we're not meeting congregations where they are, we're not going to help them. They're going to go, yeah, okay, well, this is nice, or what's the point? Why is she talking about this? So I'm about the customization of anything that I do. I've a 15-minute presentation sermon coming up at a synagogue in a few weeks that they they said, you're asking so many questions. I said, that's right. You're paying me to do this work for you, and I want to make sure it fits. Now, when can I talk to your rabbi? So it's doing a little bit of research up front that customizes all of that. The Doing some educator training, different things like that. I think when I started thinking about this last spring, I realized, because I do a lot of conference speaking too, like secular or disability conferences, theology conferences. And I realized we weren't getting together. These were like my colleagues, my friends, who were doing exceptional work. And I was talking to another colleague in Philadelphia, Gabby Kaplan Mayer, who I mentioned earlier. She directs the whole community inclusion in Philadelphia. It's a Jewish organization that does great work as well. And I said, this is so weird because we're not going to be able to get together and learn from all these experts and, just share ideas, and which we then bring into our own communities and our own work. So we came up with the idea to start a webinar series called just like that. Let's do it. So, because we can. It's called
Very of
Everyone.
its time, of this time.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's called Everyone's Welcome, a fresh conversation about disability. And we go live every 2 weeks. We produce a show every 2 weeks and we archive it. Um, it's at Right now it's at jkidaccess.org, and soon it'll be on my website at Inclusion Innovations as well when we get our upgrade. But all the archives are there. I think we've done 16 episodes, and it's just the best time ever, because we get to see our friends. We've had uh, we had a woman from Australia, a PhD from Australia, who did her research on non-speaking people with non-speaking autism and
Mm,
spirituality, and just mind blowing. It was, but of course, if people don't have spoken language, that doesn't mean they don't have this interior life like we all do.
right.
And it was so cool. We've had Dr. Stephen Shore, who's a really well-known researcher and autistic speaker, and just lots and lots and lots of people. We did for our J Dame book club, we had Amy Lutz on. Amy wrote a book called We Walk, uh, A Life with Autism, about her son, about raising her son. It's a very raw memoir. Her son has non-speaking autism, and we have a children's book this year, um, and it's called Just Elliot by Sue Bayer, Jewish author, about a kid living with autism, talking about what it's like. So, and we had a show featuring the authors of past JDAM years, which is great. And then our most recent one was last week, and we had Aaron Kaufman from Jewish Federations of North America, which is doing a month of advocacy called JDAM, and they're doing all these amazing programs. And we had Sarah Krantz Samet from Shabbat Together. and Karen Jackson of Community for All. And they were all on talking about their initiatives and all the really cool things that they're doing. So
Well,
our next show is next week about mental health.
Well, it's
We have
great that there's
speakers.
still so much going on. There's still so much vibrancy around this month, even if it's not being done in the traditional ways that we've all come to expect.
Absolutely.
Our synagogues and our institutions celebrating this and bringing it all together.
Exactly. And, stay tuned. There's so much more, and especially with the pandemic, and reaching people in their homes and having the technology and the know-how, and even a lot of people don't have internet connections. So purchasing the synagogues and organizations can really help by purchasing internet access for people. And there's just so many different ways to make this a world where everyone belongs.
Well, Shelly, thank you so much for joining us. Last two questions, and we will let you get back into what is, I know, a very busy month, obviously, for you still, even with not being on the road. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together.
Okay. How come those two?
I love them. A fresh start every year. And I think they're easy holidays to understand. And one of them you don't even have to cook for.
Well, we do, because we always host Breakfast at our house. So
I know. We do too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not the big. No, I really love them because, first of all, I think they're my earliest memories of Judaism in my life. And it's just such a spirit of joy and happiness to welcome a new year and to be with the people we want in our lives, we know and love and like. And also, one of the things that I do in my synagogue, we belong to Bet Shalom. I've been chanting Torah for many, many years, and I get to do Torah laning for the high holidays in this beautiful trope, and I just love that.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah.
And finally, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Right now, it is challah.
Can't go wrong.
Ever since the pandemic started, I've been baking every Friday, and I love to try new recipes, and I make a darn good challah. I like to try those different things, and everybody loves it, and we share it with our grandkids and our kids, and it's usually gone by Sunday night, so
can never go wrong with a good challah. We bake it in our house too. So usually we do a batch, and keep one for that week and then freeze two, and so then we always have one for the next week. But
so good.
It's time to make new though. So refresh the batch.
About it.
There is the really, smell of the fresh challah coming out.
Yeah, and braiding, and not just braiding it, but although I use my new KitchenAid, which I got because I make challah.
You need the right tools for the job.
Right. So, yeah.
No problem with that.
Challah.
Absolutely. Well, Shelly Christensen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for passing on your wisdom and experience about Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. And thank you for being part of our show this week.
Oh, thank you, Lonnie. It's an honor, a pleasure, and all we want is to belong.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.